Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This is Jim Nelson. I'll be presenting, and we'll be talking about capacity planning today. And in data center capacity planning, we'll be talking about a number of items and different disciplines that involved, as you can see on the screen. Balancing the idea and the concept and the objective is to balance IT and technical capabilities, including communications, the physical plant, facilities, and management capacity to meet the business needs of the organization. There's my handsome self, and I'll continue to move on. Obviously, a face made for radio. As we go into capacity planning, let me do one slide adjustment here. Before I get into this, in my experience, I found that the technical side of the house has no problem understanding the importance of capacity planning. How well they do it varies, but then explaining it to the business. So I wanted to open to help you out if you're having a challenge or having to explain this to non-technical folks. I want to use a very non-technical example every day, just little example that perhaps you can use if you're talking to your C-level or your top management. And the non-technical example would be your own personal automobile or your car. And have you ever had the pleasure or the experience, whether it's yourself, a family member, a neighbor, a friend, where you've run out of gas? So we'll take that a little bit further. On capacity, your vehicle has a fuel tank, and it has a certain capacity depending on the size of liters or gallons. When you run out of fuel, obviously you haven't planned properly for that capacity, and running out of fuel is definitely not desired. If you've ever been through that experience, it's frustrating, it's disruptive, it usually happens at the most inopportune time. You're running to a meeting or to pick up somebody at the airport or an event, and either you can't get out of the driveway, or worst case, you're stuck on the side of the road, walking down the street with a little red can looking for some fuel. So expanding upon that is, what is the root cause? Did you have a maintenance failure? Was there no warning light? Was your vehicle not sophisticated enough to tell you you only have a few kilometers or you have a few miles left until you're out of fuel? Did your fuel gauge malfunction? Did it fail? Were you just not paying attention? Were you too busy? You drove home and you were going to stop, but it got late. Was it a lack of resources? You didn't have any money in your pocket, or your credit card failed where you were not able to fill up your tank. Was there some kind of unexpected surge type event, which we'll talk about in the technical? Maybe that's a spouse or a kid or a family member decided to drive your vehicle and they did not fill the tank. You came out expecting you had a certain amount of fuel left in your tank, and you had a pleasant surprise. So that's maybe a simple way of explaining the importance of capacity planning and the undesired effects if it's not done properly. I won't even mention the potential damage to the vehicle, clogging fuel filters, line up all the crud in the bottom of the tank that comes in between. So that's maybe a way that you can help explain to others. So a very simple real-world example. So the purpose of data center capacity planning that we'll talk about today, one second here, is to avoid that situation in your data center and critical environment. We'll talk a little bit about the areas and disciplines you need to consider on. And we'll give you a couple of tips of approaches, methodologies, and forecasting. And then some emerging trends, coming trends, different tools and capabilities that help you do this using technology. Okay. So basically, a clear definition, as you see on your screen, data center capacity planning is having a process or establish or a protocol or a strategy that ensures the IT organization's computing resources, power loads, the footprint, space, cooling capacity are able to meet the expected workloads or demands from the organization and or your customers. So we're going to do a quick poll here, Margot.
If you can select the best answer from the choices below, we'll leave this poll open here for a few more seconds here. Okay, we've got about 75, 80% of the people have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. And we'll share with you the results. Looks like 54% answered data center, critical environment technician or manager. And then the other big bucket, Jim, was disaster recovery / business continuity.
Yeah, that's pretty realistic and to be expected. So it's a good demographic. So we have a significant, say we have half of the folks on the line that are on the IT side of the house. They may be involved in capacity planning, may have responsibility, or just may contribute and feed it to another unit within the department or the division that does this. And of course, your DR, BC contingency folks want to make sure this is done and avoid any problems, and then again have a capability or a capacity, a plan, or a strategy in place if the unfortunate does occur. Good. Okay, so driving at the purpose of data center capacity. Achieve efficient use of the physical infrastructure is critical. In the physical infrastructure, I'll talk about whether that's using that fuel analogy. Is that backup power? Is that generator? Is it fuel available and refill contracts that most of you are very familiar with? Also, this capacity planning, it's a bit of a crystal ball. It helps to discover potential issues and do some predictive maintenance issues, predictive failure issues to avoid and prevent and have a plan in place for the undesired consequence. It also gives you opportunities when done well in sharing the information to improve efficiency. So the ultimate game is providing quality business services and high availability to meet your needs. Also, if you're like many other folks, you maybe have inherited a data center or critical environment that was built or designed by somebody else, and you're just trying to operate it and keep it functional, whether it's a few years old or a few decades old. So as technology changes and the business changes and things emerge, we kind of talk about making sure that you can keep your technical and data center strategy either aligned with or hopefully in some cases be a step or two ahead of the organization and their expansion needs. And that's where your IT technical people have a huge opportunity to work with your DR, BCP folks who are also interacting and trying to track the direction and expansion and growth of the company. So there's a natural liaison component when you're talking about capacity planning. And it's on a positive, proactive approach versus a reactive and recovery approach. Of course, what I just put up, sudden peak requirements. Is that demand, denial of service, some changes, merger of acquisition? Or in that non-technical, did one of your kids or a spouse or a significant other borrow your car and use up some of your resources and created a peak demand that wasn't in your program planning? And the idea, when done efficiently, and you get better at it over time, is to provide an accurate prediction or forecasting of future workloads and the resources requirements to be able to manage your technical infrastructure and your service capability to meet the business objective and your customer objectives. And you're doing a balance, of course. IT is always the fine art of balancing between technology and business needs, and risk and health and capabilities. So we talked a little bit about the different disciplines. We need to make sure that we're doing capacity planning in the network, whether that's the wired or the wireless, or internal to your organization, or the public switch network or vendors. And making sure also, I'd mentioned power, especially in the data centers. You're all very familiar, a critical environment, backup or alternate or conditioned power. And that runs everywhere from your service entrance, making sure that you have the right sized breaker capacity and feeders running through your conductors, and checking your trip settings and the ratings and capabilities, ARC default redundancy and upgradability, and the ability to switch over to your backup or conditional power system. So naturally, that starts to bring in the tradesmen or the blue-collar element, and the electricians and the engineers that are operating your system. Then you have a different group of folks, as you're probably very familiar with, that are dealing with cooling in the data center, which is a constant theme that we talk about in the profession, making sure that we have enough capacity of the units. And it's not only capacity, but it's also distribution capability. Can I get the cooling and the power where I need it? Or have I created block zones, whether it's through ramps or zoning or demising or obstructions? And the ability to move the air as desired, and the ability to create pressure redundancy and upgradability. So we always have a challenge if there's changing infrastructure as you're changing over time from the old mainframe world to then distributed systems and rackophobia. Now we're going into more virtualization and internal clouds and hybrid clouds and hosted public clouds. And as equipment moves around, that does affect the physical plant original design intention. Of course, we got compute. Always having program runtimes and looking at your profiling of your capabilities. Are there delays? What is acceptable? Are there bottlenecks in the compute? And then along with the compute, we also have, of course, the storage. Do I have enough capacity? Can I get to the capacity? Is it specific system requirements? Is it online and available? Is it soft storage that's maybe offline or into an archive mode? Or are you moving something on premises or on-prem, as we call it, or maybe moving it out to the cloud in the network storage? And then, of course, real estate. Do you have enough physical floor space? Do you have enough rack space? Do you have optional build-out space? And how can you redesign and reconfigure what you have as changes are occurring? So it is not a project. You've all been involved with different projects as you expand or upgrade, whether it's upgrading your UPSs or changing out your racks or changing to different technology. Doing capacity planning is a nice way to bring that project capability into a process and documented discipline of a management system. So if you're going to do this capacity planning, first thing is to identify, is it accepted? Is this something that you're embedded in your culture that's being done very well? Do you have a handful of people that are working on with tools and spreadsheets and constantly managing this? Or is it an ad hoc capability? So who's responsible not only for the day-to-day operational aspects of all those disciplines we just talked about, but is it allowed, endorsed, understand, and supported? Does the business understand that? Highlight the benefits is, that's why I use that simple non-technical example, is they don't want to be sitting on the side of the road and walking down the side of their business with a little red can trying to make it to the next filling station. So there are benefits, and when it talks to the business, that's where you try and have an ongoing dialogue through whatever channels you have available. It is, what do they see on the future? What are their growth? What are their marketing? What are their capabilities? Where do they see excuse me, major expansion? Where do they see shrinkages and changes and things that are, going to be sundowned? What kind of requirements do you need to do good capacity planning? So is there specific formal metrics that you establish in availability? Do you send up a red light when you get to 80% of capacity, 85%, 90%? And that's unique to each organization. So there's no set answer. It's what is the speed of your business? What is your capacity? And how quickly does it evaporate on you, for lack of a better term? So designing and figuring out what those magic numbers are for your organization, internal, is a fun challenge. If you are a service provider, and I imagine there's a few where you are either in the cloud business, a managed services, and hosting, that becomes more challenging also, because you're not managing internal to your business, but you're managing a huge number of customers and trying to stay in tune with what their needs and growth expectations are. And so you're really orchestrating a large band or a symphony, many players. So part of that first, what do you have in place? Number 4 is analyzing your current resources. What is your infrastructure, and what is your current maximum carrying capacity, and what's your situation? And we'll drill down a little bit more on that. And again, it's kind of been a theme that I've mentioned for what's happening tomorrow, what's your crystal ball, what's the future needs, how do you forecast what business demands are and future capacity planning requirements. So it can't be done in a vacuum. It can't be done in a silo, because you're constantly looking for that input, the feeders coming into the technical environment and the outputs. So the more people involved, that's why I was kind of pleased to see that we have technical side and we have the business continuity DR side. But between the two of you, you also got to reach out and reach either the rest of your internal business or the balance of your customers. That becomes a challenge, but the more you work on this and highlight this as a value-added, positive, proactive approach for capacity planning, the better your results will be. And that goes into influencing your audience. So engaging both within IT, and as most of you are probably familiar with, that's not my job. Johnny or Terry over in tech support or capacity planning take care of that. But you still need information, and you need their specific expertise within IT and the various disciplines and areas. And then at the business at large, and as I mentioned, for folks that are out in the public switch network or the cloud providers or managed services, your various clients. So there's a kind of a recognized multi-step approach to do some effective capacity planning. Some of this may seem basic to your technical side, but it needs to be done properly and effectively, which is a challenge. What are your capabilities? So part of that is determining all the components required for provisioning new equipment, and that's across all those disciplines, plus more that we just briefly highlighted in the previous slide. Compute, network, storage, the physical plant side, cooling, fire protection, electrical. So what are your total capacity and what are your current usage levels and what are your requirements? All of these. So you also are constantly looking to see in capacity planning, what can I leverage for existing capacity that I can reuse, or it's stranded or it's isolated? How can I use it more efficiently, whether it's space, power, cooling, networking, or compute? And as you work through the list of capacity requirements, you're also looking to ensure you've got resources available in case of a failover situation. So for your DR, business continuity folks, is that a failover to a secondary site? Is that a failover to your own internal or commercially available hot sites or cold sites? Or is there the balance that comes with your strategy? So this whole capacity planning really feeds into your BIA and your risk assessment and your network and systems availability work that you're doing. And you need to have a plan for provisioning of new equipment or new capacities across the board. So all of those folks in your team, what are their plans? And it's nice to have an overall strategy that's reviewed and coordinated that you grow into versus a reactionary approach or a project-based approach. So think more process and management systems for capacity planning. Keyword capacity, second word planning versus reacting. And then also you need to look at determine what are the impacts of any additions that you do to the data centers or things that you decommission or retire or sundown. Is there something that's a positive that you can pick up some capacity, whether it's space or cooling capability or electrical capability? Or is there, you also need to look at the risk of undesired consequences of changes that are made. And then planning for reserving certain space for all capacities required to move that. So that's space planning, it's positional planning, out into the office space, it's who sits in which desk, are you hoteling, are you doing remote workers, etc. So this begins to expand and spider across the entire organization. So if you're heavily into remote workers, I use that term rather than work from home, because remote workers should be able to conduct their business at an acceptable level, and it's probably business as usual in many organizations in the current situation. But are there changes that occur as your workforce changes? So you need to also look at that remote worker. And talking to the DR business continuity folks, when that's just put down as a strategy, we can work from anywhere, we can work from home, that's what you're always stressing and examining and checking through exercises, tests, and drills, and hopefully avoiding those big events, regional outages, storms, and we've had quite a few of those, and they're normally recurring occurrences. It seems to have been a very busy last several months for that. And then having a control, right to work, permit to work, or issuing work orders that physically provision new equipment. So you're not operating out of your headband, or you don't have a team that's responding and reacting quickly without thinking the process through. And making sure that what the change in capacity that you're doing is audited, checked, verified, goes through a change control process, and then be able to accept that work and issue the approval to make those changes. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about methodology, and I'm expanding upon those earlier steps. Calculate the current capacity. What do you have? What is the capacity of your system at its weakest point? So if you're a very heavily redundant facility, where you're trying to be active-active or active-near-active or active-passive. What does that all mean? Simple terms. How heavily are you restricted? If you're looking for high availability, that means you have many, many redundant capabilities to ensure that availability, which is the argument on the opposite side. Efficiency is when you look at electrical mechanical devices, simply said efficiency, I'll just touch on that. Your mechanical and electrical devices, whether it's a generator, etc., or an HVAC unit, they're at their most efficient when they're running full out, when they're running at 100% capacity. If you're dealing with a high availability and a redundancy situation, you'll never achieve that, or you don't want to achieve running at 100% capacity. Then you're not able to fail over from an A side to a B side, for example, on your electrical power supply. Okay. That drives into calculating what your current loading is. Are you load balanced? So you'll talk to your electricians and your operators and your engineers. How well balanced are you across phases in a three-phase system? How well balanced are you across your A side feeds, B side feeds, and back to your UPS all the way through your system? Same with your other disciplines, whether it's network or compute. And account for that redundancy. So examples, I'll touch again. Anybody that's been on ICOR, critical environments, should be familiar with N, but I'll touch on N. Basically, in simple terms, N is what is your need, and then +1, and then +2 talks about I need one UPS, but I want to have in a second UPS in case that fails, or a third UPS, and that I load balance across 2 or 3. And that's really when you're getting into a higher availability, a tier 3 type environment. And 2N is completely redundant. So that's really an active, and very complex and expensive environment. So I won't go into more detail on that because that's several days in itself. What are your design conditions? And that talks to a terminology that we hear. We're fault tolerant. We're concurrently maintainable. I can work on things without taking an outage or scheduling a shutdown. What was the original design? And in many cases, you may have inherited that. And are you trying to purpose your current environment to a design that's maybe lacking? Or are you current and up to date and you're effectively managing to that design? And then the witch's brew, the devil in the detail, which is about communication, coordination, and sharing. What are future changes coming in? And it's a balancing act between budget and capability. This is where it's really important to engage and get as much information as I've mentioned now for the third time from the balance of your internal organization, open those communication chains and sharing, or to your customer base. And I'm just going to run through just a couple of examples here, like looking at a resource and server rack optimization. And I'm just going to click through this. What do you have in a rack? What kind of servers? What are their makes and models? What are your disks? What are your CPUs? What kind of cooling rates? Okay. And then we have the site planning. I'm not meaning to short shrift that server optimization. For the IT operation folks, 50% they're on the line. You have some folks that are doing this on a regular basis. For the rest of you, the BCDR folks, 50% or approximately, you're hoping this is done well, and you may not be an expert in that, but you're communicating to say, are we okay? And what happens? And if we have an outage or a failure, or we need to deliver an acceptable level of service, can we obtain that? Then you're talking about site consideration, space, footprint, rack space, inventory, spare parts, quick order, things that you have in time. Just the tip for your BCDR folks or your risk-oriented folks, when you talk with the IT folks, operations, and when you talk to the tradesmen, more electricians, operator, one thing that you can use right out of your BIA. Most of you are probably using some kind of recovery time objective level or category. We need to have this available immediately, a couple of hours, within a day, within a shift, depending what your organization is. It is very, very intelligent to take a look at some of your critical spare parts. What are the lead times to be able to buy, order, and install those spares, whether it's a breaker or a UPS system or an HVAC unit or a generator or a high-ticket item. So you need to kind of factor that in and decide capacity planning. Now I need to have some spares management because I have an RTO of 4 hours, but I won't be able to replace a critical component for 4 weeks. So then you have to look at different strategies. What is available from vendors in the marketplace? Can I get something on wheels that can take me up? Can I roll the cooling tower in and put it in the parking lot? Or can I do rental power generators or order some additional bandwidth? And that gets into budget and funding, which is part of capacity planning. Site consideration, cooling, redundancy. Do you have regulatory requirements? Are you audited? Are you a tightly managed industry sector? I always like to use industry sector or business sector rather than, we still have this carryover from the old days. It's like, which industry are you in? Are you in IT? Are you in the financial industry? Some of those NIC categories that we talk about. IT isn't really an industry. There's maybe part of that is I grew up blue collar. When I think industry, I think about production and smokestacks. You have raw materials that go in, you work your magic if it's manufacturing, and out the back end comes a finished product. Not a lot of smokestacks and finished products in the IT or financial sector. So I kind of like to use that sectors, and that's just a personal foible. Okay. In addition to the things that we've talked about, we have safety, we have security, we have fire suppression, we got alarms, we got natural risk, and a whole lot of other key suppliers. And if you're going to buy anything, you have to go to purchasing, and you have to go to procurement or some kind of contract support. Good. So what else can I do? You can always look at, if you cannot support something or you're getting a period of time, can I outsource? Can I put something, if you need additional capacity, can I grab some physical space and repurpose that? Can I put something like a mobile solution out of my parking lot or get something temporarily rolled up? Can I lease something to get me through a capacity challenge issue where I roll up some additional resources for some weeks a month? Or can I contract for some additional services? Or can I have some kind of service level agreement across internal data centers or partners or something more formal with providers? And I do see that we have a mix of service providers and practitioners. So what is your timeliness of getting those additional contingent resources? So you start to see a natural link here with capacity planning to spares management to reaching your BIA and your strategies and your recovery capabilities. So what can you align and work? Now you start to move out into the supply chain if you're efficient and start to talk to your vendors and suppliers and contractors. Do they have anything special that can help you out? Do they have that breaker in storage that you're searching for? Then we have the virtualization issues, and we have open architects to consider that maybe can help you in certain situations, or as you move to that in your capacity planning as part of your changing strategy. One advantage that we have in the current and moving forward is we have a lot of tools. We have a lot of technology and automation that can simulate versus having to try and physically pull out a test sector. So always take a look at those simulation tools and monitoring. it's all over. So make sure you research vendors, etc. We've just completed a whole cycle of conferences, whether it's Data Center World, Uptime, DRJs, and Continuity Insights, etc. If we can make an entire movie without actors and do simulation tools with green screens and etc., I think there's some capability where we can work on some capacity planning using that technology. We also have electrical power monitoring software. Just a difference in a generation. You now have a plug strip that's smarter than your master electrician was a decade or two ago, and it can get you information real time with analytics. So take a look at some of the tools that are available towards you. You also have modeling tools and building automation tools for space, layout, piping, electrical that helps you understand this capacity planning. In addition, we have artificial intelligence and we have machine learning tools that are beginning to help us on this capacity planning. And I'm hoping you're using at least a select portion of some of these and looking at using other tools that are available out there. But then it's also where you need to have this conversation for resources, budget, and spending, and determine what's the right mix. You can't do everything, but what kind of tools or vendors or contracted services can I bring into play? So the successful outcome is a good data center capacity plan. And what does that mean? For your business continuity DR size, higher availability. If there is a problem, it can be addressed nimbly, agilely, and quickly, and trying to avoid extended outages, disruptions that we all recognize generally can be resume updating events, which we wish to avoid. So assessing your current resource levels is absolutely important, imperative, beyond important. It's critical. And we've talked about this red stripe a little bit, customer demands, etc. So I'm going to move on. So some of the tools, whether more and more tools are available in the category of DSIM, which is basically technology that helps you manage your infrastructure. You can also look at your ITIL and your service management. ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library. Okay, that's also ISO 20000. So ITIL is something that you would do as an individual credentialing. And ISO 20000 is something where you would go towards maybe having that for the organization. Similar where quality standard, you might be a quality practitioner and you go to seek 9000 or a quality recognition. The same with business continuity. You might look for ISO 22301 and the same with cybersecurity. So it also needs the definition of mission critical and digital constructs that you're building or you've inherited and you're trying to maintain. And requirements on metrics, and more we're seeing metrics, key performance, and dashboards. You need the capacity planning to help you to achieve this, and that's a natural, then you create a communication level to then talk about, to communicate with the business. So if you're going to do this capacity planning, who are the key players and stakeholders? Who has the plan ownership? Who's responsible with backups and plan owners? And if you need specialized subject matter expertise, how do you engage them and get the information of their expertise involved into the program? And again, establish a metric. That's like that fuel gauge in your car. Is it full? Or you have a modern readout and technology that tells you, I have 23 miles until I am out of fuel, and you're 26 miles away from a fuel station. So you may want to set your metrics. Sorry, I just wanted to go back to that examples. So they must be obtainable, measurable, and can stand alone. So if you're 3 miles short of reaching the fuel station in a rural situation, maybe you need to adjust your metrics. So your current infrastructure has really got to be accurate. So whether you can do this internally and you have the resources, or maybe you need to engage a consultant or contractors or some engineers to help you out with that. So really it's like, what do I have versus what do I need? And where am I in that fuel gauge along? How much am I at 3/4 full? Am I at 1/4 empty? And again, we've talked about workload forecast, and then a crosswalk of requirements with utilization. What can I repurpose? What can I understand? Where can I pick something up or reuse it or use it efficiently? By doing this, over time, you build your historical. Nobody can read the future. Let me just talk about if you capture historical information and you can use it towards forecasting and trending. You can't accurately predict the future in many cases, but you can get some trends and some scenarios that can help you shrink that window of the future. So those projections and utilizations against capacities and, again, contingencies. And that's where your risk people, your business continuity and your DR folks come in. When is the worst possible situation? They're questioning that of the business. When is the worst possible time that a problem could occur? When are you busiest? Is that at the end of a month? Is that in a summer shutdown? Is that in a seasonal holiday selling? So trees try and avoid capacity planning as a project or a single event, and it's a moving picture. It's not a snapshot. So it's a process, and it's an approach and a management system that you're able to adapt and provide additional value and link in with the organization. In addition to the customer's lineal needs, there's going to be that demand and surge requirements that happens. That's the simple example I tried to use where somebody borrowed your car, went for a long drive for whatever purpose, and did not refill the tank and used up part of your capacity or part of your capability. So business capacity and your service levels and the components and capabilities and resources that you have in place to meet not only current but future business requirements. You're trying to do this in a cost-effective manner. Another way of the metrics, how far in the future can you plan out? Can you plan out for a month? Can you plan out for a calendar quarter? Can you plan out for a budget cycle? Most organizations that I've seen over the years that focus on good data center capacity planning can really only reach out at this time about 2 or 3 calendar quarters. And then that's a sliding calendar quarter as you're moving forward, and you always try and push that line out. Then that's a risk where you go back and talk to the business. It's like, what is the future trend? What's going on? Is there something that can surge and happen that can then change that 2 or 3 calendar quarter cycle and shrink, extend, or reduce that or impact that in some way? So I'm going to hand this to Margot for a quick poll here to help us out. Go ahead, Margot.
So if you can select one from the options below, we're looking to gauge how mature is your data center capacity plan. I see the results coming in. We're about 60%. We'll leave it open a few more seconds here. And here we have the results. Clear majority, 61%, is it's okay, but could use improved forecasting analytics.
Well, this is Jim. I would say that's a subjective answer. In most cases, is it informed? Can you back that up with factual opinions and present that and support that with evidence to your management team? Then you're in pretty good shape. Continuous improvement, just a few things that we've talked about on your approach and your process. Are there opportunities for improvements here, OFIs, or areas to improve, and how you can add and feature and add some capability to your overall approach for capacity planning? Is it communicating with other constituencies in the organization? Do you have enough resources? Do you have the right tools? Are you doing capacity planning the same way you did last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and it worked okay for you? But I think most people recognize, from what I'm saying here, there are some areas and opportunities for improvement. And it may not be the most glamorous aspect of the business, but it does pay some great benefits. Okay. Going back to, is it subjective? Can you supply that evidence, support, documentation? Is it reliable? So what happens to response time if a transaction rate for this application doubles? Can you answer that? Can I migrate some of this workload from an old legacy system to our new standard platform? That's a challenge. Many of you have probably had projects, failures, opportunities, and struggles with moving from legacy to newer technologies. Can you do it without hurting performance? Absolutely. A key question, but in most cases, no. There's going to be some impact, I think, is a realistic question. Do we need to be concerned? What does the calendar look like, and the schedule, budget cycle, available capacity? If somebody moves in, whether it's a new tenant used in the generic sense of the service providers, or you have additional services, or maybe there's a merger, acquisition, or whatever it may be, is there an impact? I'm not saying it's virtually impossible to use traditional capacity planning to get the right resources available on a timely basis. That's why we need to leverage a lot of the technologies and tools, plus your expertise, plus your capability, and then communication and coordination. Our infrastructures are much more modular, distributed, and dynamic. The speed of business is faster. Can you hear me now? Can we move over? We've all seen on the television commercials for telecommunications. The challenge, how do I slice and dice all of this data? First, you need the data and the information that's coursing through the organization. This can be an opportunity. We've always talked about silos being a negative thing, but if we take a different approach and take away the negative by silos and talk about compartmentalizing or having areas of expertise, areas of influence or subject matter expertise with a common theme, which is high availability and service levels, there might be some benefits to helping your overall enterprise capacity planning. So driving down, I talked a little bit about data forecasting. What are your data needs? You can go out to Google and the internet and YouTube and see things such as one of my favorites over time, What Happens in an Internet Minute, is a couple years old from Intel. Just looking at what occurs in an internet minute, and it's amazing what's happening with, quote, the Internet of Things and how we're becoming just a technology pervasive society. What resources do I have? What have I consumed? What I have available? What are the business transactions that I need to use? What kind of environments do I have? Do I have limitations on capacity planning that I discover that said this is really a need where we need to refresh and review and do a major significant change, project, upgrade, or in some cases move, relocate, move to the cloud, move to a different environment, or maybe discontinue and shift some business. So this is all fundamental facts and detail that help you understand and support the business. Data forecasting versus data collection. dozens and countless hours were consumed in this little case study in data collection and guesstimating growth. Okay. So a common data center strategy that occurs is oversimplification of demand. It's like, we're going to grow 3%, we're going to grow 5%, okay, in whatever particular capabilities that you have. Oversimplification. Simplification as you roll up and do these reports. Let me give you one other example, and this is something I've encountered as a professional, as a consultant, and as an auditor several times. If you have a team that's doing detailed data center capacity planning, they have extensive spreadsheets, tools, etc. The challenge then becomes they're down in the weeds with this information, and they're asked to provide a summary. And their boss, their supervisor, maybe as it moves up the chain of command a couple of levels, then you're looking as it goes up to top levels, C levels, business deciding levels, they're looking at a simple dashboard. And many times they're looking at a stoplight chart. And I've had the opportunity more than once to go in and talk to these top bosses and say, you're just not that smart to spend 45 seconds and a minute looking at this slide or this metrics. You have some very competent people that have spent weeks, months, and hours on this, maybe years. And you can absorb this in 45 seconds. You're just not that smart. And in some cases, I'll go, yes, well, this has turned green. We're using a stoplight chart, and yellow and red. I said, yep. Well, let me confess, you just made a decision on that, and I just changed the colors on you. I had a mistake. It was a formatting, and you made a decision. I just changed everything that was green to red or yellow. You looked at the colors and made a decision. So that oversimplification of sharing that knowledge up through the organization and getting them oriented is, you got to be talking to the right audience. Example, if it's not broke, we don't need to fix it. Forecasting challenges. I just slid by a couple of slides because I'm watching the time here, and these are available for you. Historic data is always incomplete, okay? But being able to look as well as we can and improve it and be candid with the organization, say, my confidence factor in this information is low, medium, or high, or 50%, or we have solid objective evidence for 60% of this, I think, or 2/3. The rest is a little bit of witchcraft, art and science. Okay. Forecasting challenges. What is big data? That's a whole different conversation. And how the business is currently driving the resources being consumed in the data center, which you all know on the IT side, there's a lack of understanding through the business. And are there market shifts, and can you nimbly adjust to these market shifts? All part of forecasting challenges and capacity planning that I've slightly touched on now for the third time. Some tips. Can your capacity plan? Are you in a cyclical business? Are there peaks and valleys that may occur? Are there seasonal work? Are you launching certain campaigns? Are you on a 4-year cycle where you have peaks and valleys? Talk with your financial sectors. Talk with your financial departments and see what kind of trends and rolling that you have. Just an example, lineal projection may show that a purchase should be made in June, but a cyclical data center kind of looks where the business usage may occur. So it really gets into a couple different strategies. Do you want enough capacity and you grow into it? Or are you doing just in time? Both are fine. Or are you doing a reaction? It's like, we're out, so let's get some more capacity across the various disciplines. So there's a balance of what you can afford and what you're going to grow into. It's an inventory and a budget cost issue. But by implementing capacity plans and understand when you need it and when is the proper time to make an investment or a capital expenditure, and when to escalate those and move those forward to meet those business needs. And now you begin to bring a significant amount of potential value to the organization. And by doing this capacity planning and getting more mature at that, you can begin to get something more granular. Is it just annual budget, or is it quarterly, or is it something that's occurring on a weekly basis, and it's something that you're reporting to in staff meetings, and you're sending the reports up daily, weekly, monthly, or is it real time, or as near to real time as makes sense in your business? So if you have a standardized forecasting and a standardized capacity process or management system within the organization, it helps to explain and speak the same language. And it gives you wonderful opportunities to leverage, again, areas of potential improvement that may go unnoticed and unseen. Just in the past, and this has been touched on intentionally a little bit earlier, it may have been spreadsheets or hardware or difficulties, capacity planning in the past. Okay, built data centers capacities for the last 10 years, resulted in over-provisioning, idle assets waste increased, inefficient management of energy, difficulty to provision. It was really focused on the infrastructure on-prem, keeping an eye on your servers and your storage and your network, and maybe missing a few other things. Emergency trends, use the tools. Use your analytics. Use your automation. Use DSEM. Take a look and facilitate, talk with your vendors, suppliers, customers. Talk with your salespeople. That's okay. You don't have to buy, but understand what's out there. If you're able to go to virtual or real trade shows or exhibits or conferences in the exhibit hall, understand what they have available for you and how you can manage more effectively and do a better job and move away from a manual process to using artificial intelligence, hopefully in the future, and learning machines to then gather information much more quickly that then allows the human detailed interaction with that information. If you went to virtualization, it has in many cases resulted in breaking that tie between an application and infrastructure, but now we have different capabilities and different challenges. So there are definitely various options that may fit your needs and challenges, whether it's infrastructure as a service, DR as a service, or cloud-based capabilities. That might be for production, or it might be for a specific period where you get short. That maybe going to the cloud brings that capability. That might be that little red can that you're walking down to get yourself to the next position or get yourself further down to the next fuel station. And again, with capacity planning to roll through, what are your thresholds we've talked about? Being able to do some predictions, whether they're linear or cyclical, and look at workloads and do some modeling, as we've talked about, and using various tools and capability. Do some simulation and do some simulation modeling. As this technology continues to mature, it's amazing what you can, the capabilities that are out there in the market at this time. Do some analytics, using some formula and queuing on the theories, picking right data, and again, good data versus, you want information, not just raw data. And as you become more mature, you're able to select, refine, and mature what you're looking for. Without automation, good luck. Okay. Just to touch on some of these tools that are available. Time it takes to use, and this is pretty much just a dashboard that's self-explanatory. It's different factors to consider. If you're going to do a little bit more work and follow up on this, take a look at these slides and take a look and factor these issues into your decision matrix or your little report cards as you look at different vendors' capabilities or services. Planning for the future. And I'm going to wrap this up because we're getting close to our 1 o'clock limit, our 1 hour limit. We've covered a lot of ground here. It's not getting any easier. We have more technology. We're managing more data. We're having to do it in a faster time. Capacity planning has always been done to some degree, but it's becoming an art form. It's like degree stacking. Maybe you've gone from maybe you need to move towards an advanced degree level of doing your capacity planning. You need to look at future business demands so you don't get caught short or get pulled over to the shoulder of business operations due to a lack of effective planning. Optimize your solutions. Just a few things to remember. Things that changes. There are sudden changes, but if you look at future trends, you can see early warning signs as things begin to change over time. You know services running on older technologies need more resources and more management. But you need to cover everything that you're using in the way of technologies. That's why you need to have a program and a process approach. Okay, I'm going to turn this back to Margot for a quick one, if you don't mind.
If you can choose all that apply here, we're going to switch up the directions here. So what modeling methods do you use or your organization use for data center capacity planning? Got about half the folks in so far. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds here. Okay. We'll share those results. Largest respondents are performance thresholds monitoring, closely followed by capacity modeling and then analytic modeling.
Well, I think that, thanks folks, I think that poll, just that little result right there, says a lot. For whatever you've answered, in those different categories, maybe it's something that you look at as continuous improvement or areas to expand or improve or enhance the capabilities of what is being done on capacity planning in your process and your organization. Thank you, Margot. So I'm going to move to summary. Capacity planning, as I've tried to stress here, is much more important than it's ever been in the past. And that's speed, business, changing technology. I think that's pretty much understood. Every organization has to have that capacity planning. It really needs to be a process or a living way you do it or a program, not so much an occasional attention to detail. It's not easy, but we have more tools to help us, including automation, and as you begin to educate yourself and leverage different competencies within your organization, it can be achieved and can be improved. Comparing what you invest in capacity planning and getting prepared versus being stuck and disrupted on the side of the road, being delayed, not able to make that meeting, and business disruptions and outages and downtime. It's a pretty easy decision for most top managers to prevent versus respond and be impacted from problems that occur. So I hope you've walked away with some thoughts here. So we have, obviously at ICOR, there's a tremendous amount of information in the critical environment series that drives down. So I'd like to highlight that a little bit. Just take a look at buildresilience.org and tell your friends, and maybe some folks that don't understand that, maybe you want to share that website and have a discussion with them over lunch or a cup of coffee. And here, upcoming webinar series, kind of a sneak peek into what's going on as you take a look. We're trying to do regular webinar series that occur throughout the year. So it's offered live and on demand, as you know, for a period of time. Okay, and then we will archive these. I will also ask everybody in attendance, please contact us. Contact Linda at the ICOR or through the ICOR if you have other topics, ideas, etc., that you think are timely or essential that you're not seeing that's provided. We would love to work with you to help all of us across the world to become more resilient. And I thank you so much for your time. Over to you, Margot.